She was forced to marry a Lakota war chief for peace. She never expected to find love. The morning began like any other in the small frontier settlement, but the air felt heavier than usual. A thin layer of frost covered the wooden fences and the dry grass beyond them. Smoke rose slowly from chimneys, and the sound of quiet footsteps filled the dirt paths between the homes. People spoke in low voices, as if they were afraid that speaking too loudly might bring trouble closer. The winter had been long and hard. Food had grown scarce, and everyone had learned to count every piece of bread and every handful of grain. Even the children played more quietly than before, as if they could sense the worry that rested in the hearts of the adults. In one of the smallest homes at the edge of the settlement lived a young woman who had always been known for her gentle nature. She woke before sunrise, as she did every day, and helped her mother prepare the morning meal. Her hands moved quickly and carefully, shaped by years of hard work. She had grown up in this place, surrounded by the same hills and fields, hearing the same stories from elders about survival, hope, and fear. But lately, those stories had taken a darker tone. People spoke more often about conflict, about misunderstandings, and about the danger of losing what little peace remained. She tried to focus on her tasks, but she could feel something changing. The night before, several leaders from the settlement had gathered in the main hall. Lantern light had stayed on long after most homes had gone dark. No one had said much afterward, but the silence itself felt loud. The young woman noticed the way her father avoided her eyes that morning. He spoke kindly, as always, but there was a weight in his voice that she had never heard before. She stepped outside after breakfast, pulling her shawl tightly around her shoulders. The cold air touched her face, and she breathed in slowly, hoping to calm the uneasy feeling in her chest. From the hill near her home, she could see the land stretching far into the distance. It was a land that held both beauty and hardship. Traders sometimes passed through, bringing stories from other places. From them, she had learned a few words of the Lakota language, mostly out of curiosity. She never imagined those small lessons would one day matter so much. As the sun rose higher, a messenger arrived at her home. He spoke quietly with her parents. She stood in the doorway, watching their faces change. Her mother's hands trembled slightly, and her father's shoulders seemed to sink under an invisible weight. When they finally turned to her, she knew that something important had been decided without her. They asked her to sit. The room felt smaller than ever before. Her father spoke gently, choosing each word with care. He explained that tensions between the settlement and a nearby Lakota band had grown worse after a misunderstanding at a trading post. Supplies had gone missing, and both sides feared the other might act out of anger. No one wanted open conflict, but fear had a way of growing when people felt cornered. Leaders from both sides had met in secret. They had searched for a way to stop the growing distrust before it turned into something that could not be undone. After many long discussions, they reached an agreement. A marriage alliance would be formed to show a commitment to peace. The young woman listened, her heart pounding so loudly she could barely hear the rest of the explanation. When her father finally spoke her name, the meaning became clear. She had been chosen. At first she thought she had misunderstood. The words felt distant, like echoes from another room. But as her mother reached for her hand, the truth settled heavily in her chest. The marriage would join her to a Lakota war chief, a respected leader known for his strength and wisdom. The alliance would serve as a promise between their peoples. It would show that both sides wanted peace more than pride. She sat very still, trying to make sense of what she was hearing. She had always known that life in the settlement required sacrifice. Everyone worked for the good of the community. But she had never imagined that her own life would become part of a bargain for peace. Fear rose inside her, followed by confusion and sadness. She thought about her home, her family, and the familiar paths she had walked since childhood. The idea of leaving all of it behind felt like stepping into a deep unknown. Her parents spoke with kindness and sorrow. They told her that she had been chosen not because she was weak, but because she was strong and patient. They believed she had the ability to build understanding where others might only see differences. They reminded her that peace was fragile, and that sometimes it required great courage to protect it. Their words were meant to comfort her, but they also carried a quiet truth. The decision had already been made. In the days that followed, preparations began quickly. News spread through the settlement, and people offered quiet support. Some spoke to her with sympathy, others with admiration. A few avoided her entirely, unsure of what to say. She moved through each day as if in a dream, helping her mother pack a small bundle of belongings. She chose only what she could carry: simple clothes, a small keepsake from her childhood, and a blanket her mother had sewn years before. At night, she lay awake listening to the wind against the walls. Her thoughts wandered between fear and determination. She did not know what awaited her in the Lakota camp. She did not know the man she was meant to marry except for the stories told by traders. Some described him as a skilled leader who cared deeply for his people. Others spoke of his strength in battle. She wondered what he thought of the arrangement. Was he as uncertain as she was? Did he feel the same weight of responsibility? On the morning of her departure, the sky was pale and quiet. A small group gathered to see her off. There were no grand celebrations, only soft words and steady embraces. Her mother held her tightly, whispering encouragement. Her father placed a hand on her shoulder, his eyes filled with both pride and sorrow. She climbed onto the wagon that would carry her to the meeting place, her heart heavy but steady. The journey felt long, though it lasted only a few hours. The land stretched wide and silent around her. She watched the settlement grow smaller behind her until it disappeared from view. With every turn of the wheel, she felt her old life slipping further away. She tried to focus on her breathing, reminding herself that this path, though chosen for her, might still hold meaning. When they reached the agreed meeting spot near a line of trees, members of the Lakota band were already waiting. Their presence felt calm but watchful. At their center stood the war chief. He carried himself with quiet confidence, his expression serious, but not unkind. For a moment, time seemed to slow. She stepped down from the wagon and faced him, aware that this meeting would shape the rest of her life. Their first exchange was simple and formal. There were no long speeches, only respectful gestures. Dad. She could sense that he, too, understood the weight of the moment. This was not a meeting of romance or choice. It was a meeting of duty and hope. Both of them stood as symbols of an agreement meant to protect many lives. As the sun moved across the sky, the ceremony was completed in a quiet and respectful way. The young woman felt a mix of fear and determination settle inside her. She did not know what the future would bring, but she understood that her role carried great importance. She took a deep breath and stepped forward into her new life, leaving behind everything she had known and walking toward a future shaped by both uncertainty and possibility. The journey to the Lakota camp felt longer than it really was. The young woman sat quietly, holding the small bundle of belongings in her lap. The land stretched wide around her, open and silent. She had never traveled this far from home before. Every mile carried her deeper into a new life she had not chosen but now had to accept. The sky seemed bigger here, and the wind moved freely across the plains, brushing against her face as if reminding her that there was no turning back. When they finally reached the camp, the sun was beginning to lower in the sky. The first thing she noticed was how organized everything felt. The lodges were placed in careful circles, and people moved with purpose. Children ran and laughed near the center, while elders sat together speaking softly. The smell of cooking food drifted through the air, and the sound of horses nearby filled the space with life. It was not what she had expected. She had imagined tension and cold stares everywhere. Instead, she saw a community living its daily life, though she still felt like an outsider stepping into a place where she did not belong. As she stepped down, her heart beat quickly. She could feel many eyes on her, though no one approached too closely. The war chief stood nearby. He did not speak at first, but he gave a small nod, a gesture that felt calm and respectful. He seemed aware of her discomfort and did not try to rush anything. An older woman approached and gently guided her toward a lodge that had been prepared for her. The inside was simple but warm. A soft blanket had been laid out, and a small place for her belongings had been arranged. The care in those details surprised her. The first evening passed quietly. She sat near the entrance of the lodge, unsure of what to do. The sounds of the camp continued around her: laughter, conversation, and the steady rhythm of daily life. The older woman who had guided her inside brought food and showed her where to sit. They could not speak much due to the language difference, but their expressions carried meaning. The older woman's kindness made the young woman feel slightly less alone. Even so, she missed her family deeply. She wondered what they were doing at that moment and whether they were thinking of her. That night, sleep did not come easily. Every sound felt unfamiliar. The wind against the lodge, the distant call of someone speaking, and the soft movement of people outside all reminded her that she was far from home. She lay awake for a long time staring at the ceiling, thinking about how quickly her life had changed. She reminded herself that this marriage was meant to keep peace. That thought gave her a small sense of purpose, though it did not erase the loneliness in her heart. The next morning began early. She woke to the sound of movement outside. When she stepped out of the lodge, she saw people already busy with their tasks. Some prepared food, others gathered supplies, and children helped with small chores. The war chief stood at a distance, speaking with a few members of the camp. He noticed her and gave a small, respectful nod again, as if to acknowledge her presence without making her uncomfortable. She appreciated that he did not force conversation or closeness. Throughout the day, she tried to observe and learn. The older woman who had welcomed her returned and showed her simple tasks. Though they spoke different languages, gestures and patience helped them understand each other. The young woman followed carefully, wanting to show respect and willingness. She knew that she needed to find a way to fit into this new life. Every small action felt important. Every attempt to learn felt like a step toward survival. Some people in the camp watched her with curiosity. A few offered friendly smiles, while others remained cautious. She understood that they, too, might feel uncertain about her presence. After all, she represented a connection to a community that had once been seen as an enemy. Trust would take time. She reminded herself to remain patient and kind, even when she felt nervous. In the afternoon, the war chief approached her for the first time to speak. He used simple words, slowly and clearly. His voice was calm. He asked if she had everything she needed and if she was comfortable. Though their conversation was short, it meant a great deal to her. His respectful tone eased some of her fear. She realized that he, too, was navigating this situation carefully. This marriage was not just difficult for her. It was also a responsibility for him. As days passed, she began to notice small details that made the camp feel less unfamiliar. She learned where water was gathered, how food was prepared, and how people worked together. She noticed the way stories were shared in the evening, with elders speaking and others listening closely. Even though she did not understand every word, she could feel the warmth in those moments. It reminded her of evenings back home when her own family would sit together and share stories.
The war chief continued to keep a respectful distance.
He made sure she had what she needed but did not push for closeness. This gave her space to adjust at her own pace. Over time, she began to see that he was not harsh or unkind. He carried himself with quiet strength, but he also showed patience. He listened carefully when others spoke and treated people with fairness. Watching him lead his community gave her a new perspective. He was not just a symbol of the agreement. He was a person with responsibilities and worries of his own. One afternoon, a strong wind swept across the plains, bringing dust and dark clouds. People in the camp worked quickly to secure their lodges and protect supplies. The young woman joined in, following the guidance of the older woman. She did her best to help, even though she was still learning. When the storm passed, she felt a small sense of pride. She had not just stood aside. She had taken part. The war chief noticed her effort and gave a quiet word of thanks. That simple acknowledgement meant more to her than she expected. As weeks turned into months, she slowly became more comfortable. She learned more words and began to understand the rhythm of daily life. She still missed her home, but the deep loneliness began to soften. Small moments of kindness from others in the camp helped her feel less like a stranger. The older woman who had guided her became someone she trusted. Through gestures and shared tasks, they formed a quiet bond. Though the marriage had started as a duty for peace, the young woman realized that it did not have to remain only that. She and the war chief were both trying to make the best of a difficult situation. They spoke more often, though still simply. Each conversation built a small bridge of understanding. There were no grand gestures, only steady steps toward trust. She began to see that this place, once so unfamiliar, held its own beauty. The open sky, the strong sense of community, and the respect people showed for one another slowly became part of her daily life. She was still adjusting, still learning, and still carrying memories of her old home, but she was also beginning to build something new. By the end of those first months, the fear that had once filled her heart had changed into something quieter. It had not disappeared completely, but it no longer controlled her every thought. In its place grew a sense of determination. She did not know what the future would bring, but she knew that she would face it with patience and courage. The path ahead remained uncertain, but for the first time since arriving, she felt that she might be able to walk it without feeling completely alone. Time moved forward in a steady, quiet way. The young woman began to measure her days not by fear, but by small routines. Each morning she woke before the sun fully rose. The sky would glow with soft colors, and the air felt fresh and cool. She would step outside the lodge and take a slow breath, reminding herself that this place was now part of her life. At first she had counted the days since she arrived. Now she found herself counting the things she had learned instead. The older woman who had first welcomed her became a constant guide. Though they did not share many words at the beginning, their understanding grew through gestures, patience, and shared work. The older woman showed her how to prepare food in the way the camp did, how to keep the lodge warm, and how to store supplies carefully. Every lesson came with a quiet smile or a gentle nod. Over time, the young woman began to understand more of the language. She listened carefully whenever people spoke around her. She repeated simple words in her mind, practicing them until they felt natural. One afternoon, as she helped gather water, a group of children approached her. At first, they only watched from a distance, curious and unsure. She smiled at them, unsure if they would respond. Slowly, one of them stepped forward and asked her a question in a mix of words and gestures. She did not understand everything, but she recognized enough to respond. The children laughed softly, not in a mean way, but with surprise and delight. That small moment broke a barrier she had felt since her arrival. From then on, they would sometimes greet her when she passed, and their simple friendliness helped her feel less alone. The war chief remained respectful and calm. He did not rush their connection. Instead, he spoke with her in short, careful conversations when the time felt right. Sometimes he asked if she was comfortable or if she needed anything. Other times he shared small details about the camp and its routines. His voice was steady and he never spoke in a way that made her feel pressured. She began to see that he carried a great responsibility for the people around him. Many came to him with questions or concerns, and he listened to each one with patience. Watching him in these moments helped her understand the kind of leader he was.
One evening, after a long day of work, she sat near the fire as people gathered to share stories.
The stars above stretched across the sky like scattered lights. The sound of voices and gentle laughter filled the air. Though she could not understand every story, she listened closely. The expressions on people's faces, the way they leaned forward to listen, and the warmth in their voices made her feel included in a quiet way. The war chief sat nearby, speaking with an elder. At one point he glanced toward her and gave a small, encouraging nod, as if to say she belonged there too. That simple gesture stayed with her long after the fire burned low. As weeks turned into months, she began to feel more confident in her daily tasks. She moved through the camp with less hesitation. She greeted people with simple words and smiles. Some responded warmly, while others remained cautious. But the tension that once surrounded her presence began to ease. She realized that trust was not something that appeared suddenly. It grew slowly, through small actions and shared moments. One day, a strong storm rolled across the plains without much warning. Dark clouds gathered quickly, and the wind began to rise. People in the camp moved with purpose, securing their lodges and bringing in supplies. The young woman joined them, following the older woman's instructions. She worked hard, holding down coverings and carrying what she could. The wind pushed against her and dust filled the air, but she did not step back. When the storm finally passed, the camp was left with scattered debris and work to do. She stayed to help with the cleanup, moving alongside others without being asked. Her determination did not go unnoticed. Later that day, the war chief approached her. He spoke a few words of thanks, slowly and clearly. She understood enough to know that he appreciated her effort. His voice held respect, not just politeness. That moment felt important. It showed her that her presence was no longer seen only as part of an agreement. She was becoming part of the daily life of the camp. Their conversations slowly grew longer. They spoke about simple things at first: weather, tasks, and small observations. Over time, they shared a bit more about their pasts. She told him about the settlement where she grew up, about the fields and the small home she had left behind. He listened carefully, asking gentle questions when he could. In return, he spoke about his own responsibilities and the challenges of keeping peace among his people. He did not speak with pride or complaint, only honesty. She realized that his role was not easy. He carried the weight of many expectations, just as she carried her own. One quiet evening, they walked a short distance from the camp to watch the sunset. The sky was filled with warm colors, and the land stretched endlessly before them. They did not speak much at first. The silence felt comfortable rather than awkward. Finally, he spoke about the importance of balance and understanding. He said that peace required patience and effort from everyone. She listened closely, thinking about how much both of them had already given to maintain that peace. In that moment, she felt a small but clear sense of connection. They were both trying to build something steady from uncertain beginnings. She also began to form stronger friendships within the camp. The older woman who had guided her continued to be a source of support. A few others started to include her in conversations and shared tasks. They showed her new skills and taught her more words. Sometimes they laughed together over small misunderstandings. Those shared moments of laughter helped ease the heaviness she had once felt. Though she still thought about her old home, the sharp ache of missing it softened over time. She carried those memories with her, but they no longer felt like a weight pulling her backward. Instead, they became part of who she was, a bridge between her past and her present. She began to see that her life now held two worlds, and she was learning how to stand between them. The war chief and the young woman continued to grow more comfortable with each other. Their interactions became more natural. They shared meals more often and spoke without as much hesitation. There was still a sense of formality between them, but it was slowly changing into mutual respect. They did not rush anything. Instead, they allowed time and shared experiences to shape their connection. As the seasons began to shift, the young woman realized how much had changed since her arrival. The fear that once filled her days had been replaced by a quiet strength. She was still learning and adjusting, but she no longer felt like a stranger in every moment. She had found a place where she could stand, work, and slowly belong. She knew that the path ahead would still have challenges. Trust between communities took time, and her role in maintaining that peace remained important. But she also knew that she was not facing it alone. The people around her had begun to see her as part of their circle. The war chief had become more than just a distant figure. He was someone she could speak to and understand, even if their journey had begun with uncertainty. As she watched the stars one night, she felt a sense of calm she had not felt in a long time. The future was still unknown, but it no longer felt as frightening as it once had. She had taken small steps every day, and those steps had led her to a place of growing understanding. What had started as a duty for peace was slowly turning into a life shaped by patience, respect, and the quiet beginnings of trust. The seasons continued to change, and with each passing month, the young woman felt more settled in the life she once feared. The plains shifted from the soft colors of spring to the bright warmth of summer. Grass grew tall and moved like waves under the wind. The camp felt alive with activity, and she no longer stood at the edges of it. Instead, she moved through the daily routines with growing confidence. What once felt unfamiliar now began to feel like a rhythm she understood. She woke each morning with purpose. Tasks that once seemed confusing had become part of her normal day. She helped prepare meals, gather supplies, and care for the lodge. She spoke more of the language now, slowly but clearly. When she made mistakes, people corrected her with patience. Sometimes they laughed gently, and she laughed with them. Those small moments of shared humor helped her feel connected in ways she never expected when she first arrived. Her bond with the older woman deepened into something like family. They worked side by side often, sharing quiet conversations filled with simple words and gestures. The older woman showed her how to notice small changes in the weather and how to read the land for signs of shifting seasons. These lessons were not only about survival, but also about respect for the world around them. The young woman listened carefully and tried to remember everything. She felt grateful for the kindness she had received, especially during the early days when she had felt so lost. The war chief remained steady in his role, but his presence in her daily life became more natural. He no longer felt like a distant figure connected only by duty. Instead, he became someone she spoke with often. Their conversations grew longer and more comfortable. They shared meals and sometimes walked together across the open land near the camp. He told her about his responsibilities as a leader, about the importance of keeping peace not just for the present but for future generations. She shared stories from her childhood and spoke about the life she had known before coming here. They listened to each other carefully, learning more with every conversation. One afternoon, as the sun stood high in the sky, a group from a neighboring band arrived with news. There were concerns about a misunderstanding over shared land and resources. It was not a serious conflict yet, but it carried the risk of growing into one if not handled with care. The war chief gathered with other leaders to discuss what to do. The young woman watched from a distance, aware of how quickly small problems could become larger ones if not resolved. Later that evening, he spoke with her about the situation. He did not share every detail, but he explained that maintaining peace required constant effort. It was not something that could be achieved once and then forgotten. It needed attention, patience, and understanding. She listened and realized that her own presence in the camp was part of that effort. The marriage that had brought her here was meant to build trust between communities. Now she saw how important that trust truly was. Over the next few days, she helped in small ways. She offered to prepare food for visiting messengers and assisted in keeping the camp organized as people came and went. Though her role was simple, it made her feel useful. She wanted to support the peace that had been created. She also saw how the war chief handled the situation calmly. He spoke with respect and listened carefully to the concerns of others. His steady approach helped ease tension, and slowly the misunderstanding began to settle without growing into something worse. That experience brought them closer. They spoke more openly after that, sharing their thoughts about responsibility and the future. The young woman realized that the bond between them had grown quietly over time. What had started as a duty now felt like a partnership. They supported each other in small but meaningful ways. He asked for her thoughts sometimes, and she felt valued when he did. She, in turn, respected his dedication to his people and his desire to keep peace. As summer turned toward autumn, the camp prepared for cooler weather. Supplies were gathered and stored. The air became crisp, and the sky seemed even clearer at night. During this time, the young woman found herself reflecting on how much had changed since her arrival. She remembered the fear and uncertainty she had carried on that first day. Now those feelings felt distant, replaced by a quiet sense of belonging. She also noticed how others in the camp treated her differently. Where there had once been cautious curiosity, there was now acceptance. People greeted her by name. They invited her to join in conversations and shared stories. She felt included in ways she had not imagined possible.
The children who had once watched her from afar now ran up to speak with her freely.
Their laughter and energy brought warmth to her days. One evening, as the sun set in shades of gold and orange, she and the war chief sat together outside the lodge. The camp was calm, and the air carried the smell of cooking food and wood smoke. They spoke quietly about the past and the future. He admitted that when he first agreed to the marriage, he had seen it only as a duty for peace. He had not expected it to grow into something more meaningful. She shared that she had felt the same fear and uncertainty, yet, over time, their shared experiences had changed everything. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the stars appear one by one. In that moment, she realized that their connection was built not on grand gestures, but on steady care and understanding. They had faced uncertainty together and found a way to support each other through it. That realization brought a sense of calm she had not felt before. The following weeks continued in a steady rhythm. The young woman helped prepare for the colder season and took part in daily activities with confidence. She found joy in simple things: the sound of laughter, the warmth of shared meals, and the beauty of the open sky. She no longer felt like someone who had been taken from her life. Instead, she felt like someone who had stepped into a new chapter and found meaning within it. The war chief remained by her side, not as a distant leader, but as a partner who valued her presence. They worked together in small ways that strengthened their bond. When challenges appeared, they faced them calmly and with patience. Their shared goal of maintaining peace gave them a strong sense of purpose. As autumn deepened and the first signs of winter returned, the young woman stood outside one evening and looked across the land. The wind moved gently through the grass, and the sky was filled with stars. She thought about how far she had come, not just in distance, but in understanding. The life she now lived was different from the one she had once known, but it was no longer frightening. It held meaning, connection, and a quiet sense of hope. She realized that what began as a forced arrangement had slowly grown into something real. It was built on respect, patience, and shared effort. Though the future would still bring challenges, she felt ready to face them. She was no longer standing alone in an unfamiliar place. She stood beside someone who had become important to her, and together they continued to protect the peace that had brought them together. Winter returned to the plains with a quiet strength. The air grew cold again, and frost covered the ground each morning. The young woman stepped outside the lodge one early day and watched her breath turn into soft clouds in front of her. A year had passed since she first arrived in the camp. When she thought back to that first journey, it felt like a different lifetime. The fear and uncertainty that had once filled her heart had slowly changed into something steadier. She no longer felt like someone passing through. She felt rooted, like a tree that had taken time to grow strong in new soil. Life in the camp continued in a calm and steady rhythm. People worked together to prepare for the colder months, storing food and repairing what needed fixing. The young woman moved easily among them, helping wherever she could. She had learned so much since her arrival: new words, new skills, and new ways of understanding the land. She carried water, prepared meals, and shared in the daily work. The older woman who had first guided her still worked beside her often. Their bond had grown into something deep and warm, like family. They did not always need many words to understand each other. A simple look or smile was often enough. The war chief remained a steady presence in her life. Their relationship had grown slowly and naturally. They spoke openly now, sharing thoughts and ideas without hesitation. They walked together across the open land, sometimes in silence, sometimes in quiet conversation. He told her about the challenges of leadership and the hopes he carried for the future of his people. She listened carefully and offered her own thoughts when she could. He valued her perspective, and that made her feel respected and important. She no longer saw herself as only a symbol of an agreement. She felt like a true partner in the life they were building together. One evening, as snow began to fall lightly from the sky, they sat near the fire inside the lodge. The soft glow of the flames filled the space with warmth. Outside, the wind moved gently across the plains, carrying the quiet sound of winter. They spoke about the past year and how much had changed. He admitted that at first he had seen the marriage only as a duty. He had wanted to protect his people and keep peace, and he believed the agreement was necessary. He had not expected that over time they would find understanding and care between them. She shared that she had felt the same. She had been afraid and unsure, but patience and kindness had helped her find strength. They realized that their bond had grown through shared effort and quiet support. It had not happened quickly. It had taken time, trust, and many small moments. They had learned to listen to each other and to stand together through uncertainty. That understanding brought a sense of calm and happiness that neither of them had expected when the arrangement was first made. As winter deepened, visitors from the young woman's old settlement arrived with news. The peace between the communities had held strong. Trade had improved, and people on both sides spoke of cooperation rather than fear. Hearing this filled her with a deep sense of relief. She had worried that her sacrifice might not truly make a difference. Now she saw that the effort had helped create a lasting connection between the two groups. The marriage that had once felt like a burden had become a bridge between worlds. The visitors were welcomed warmly. They shared stories and exchanged goods. The young woman spoke with them and listened to news from her old home. Though she still felt a connection to that place, she realized that her heart no longer belonged only there. It now held space for the life she had built in the camp. She felt grateful that she could stand between the two communities and help keep understanding strong. The war chief worked closely with leaders from both sides to maintain the growing trust. They arranged meetings and discussions to ensure that small misunderstandings did not grow into larger problems. The young woman sometimes helped by translating simple ideas or offering insight into both cultures. Her ability to understand each side became a valuable gift. She saw how her journey had given her a unique role, one that allowed her to support peace in ways she had never imagined before. In the evenings, the camp often gathered around the fire to share stories. The young woman sat among them, listening and sometimes speaking. She felt at ease in those moments, surrounded by people who had become her community. The children who once watched her from a distance now sat close by, asking questions and laughing at her stories. Their trust and friendship filled her with warmth. One clear night, after a day of quiet work, she and the war chief walked together to a small hill overlooking the camp. The sky above was filled with stars, bright and endless. They stood side by side looking out across the land. He spoke softly about the future and the hope that peace would continue for many years. She listened and felt a deep sense of gratitude. She realized that though her journey had begun with fear, it had led her to a place of understanding and connection. She thought about the girl she had been before leaving her home. That girl had been unsure of the world and afraid of what lay beyond her familiar life. Now she felt stronger, shaped by experience and supported by the people around her. She had learned that even the most difficult beginnings could lead to something meaningful if met with patience and courage. The seasons continued to turn, and with each passing month, the bond between the communities grew stronger. Trade routes became more active, and people traveled between the settlement and the camp with greater ease. The young woman often stood at the edge of the camp and watched visitors arrive and depart. Each meeting reminded her of how far things had come. What once felt like a fragile agreement had become a lasting connection built on trust. Her life with the war chief settled into a steady partnership. They worked together in daily tasks and in larger responsibilities. They spoke openly and supported each other through challenges. There was a quiet understanding between them that did not need many words. Their respect for each other had grown into genuine care, and that care brought a sense of peace to their lives. One spring morning, as the snow melted and new grass began to appear, she stood outside and watched the sunrise. The sky filled with soft colors, and the land felt full of promise. She took a deep breath and felt the calm happiness settle in her heart. The path that had once seemed so uncertain had led her to a place of belonging. She had found strength within herself and connection with those around her. She knew that the future would still bring challenges. Life on the plains was never without hardship, but she also knew that she would face those challenges with support and understanding. She was no longer alone in a strange place. She was part of a community that valued her, and she stood beside a partner who respected her. As the day began and the camp came to life with activity, she moved forward with confidence. She carried with her the lessons of the past year: patience, kindness, and the importance of listening. What had begun as a forced arrangement had grown into something real and meaningful. It had created a bond that reached beyond two people and touched many lives. Standing in the soft morning light, she felt grateful for the journey that had brought her here. She had left behind the life she once knew, But in doing so, she had gained a new one, filled with purpose and connection. The peace that had started as a fragile hope now felt strong and lasting. She smiled quietly, knowing that sometimes the most unexpected paths could lead to the most meaningful destinations.